Thurston's shingle mill near Eugene, Oregon. Ed had located Hoodoo while skiing and hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail. He decided it would be a perfect place to locate a ski area. The ski area that he built consisted of 2 rope tows and a wood frame chairlift that was went up to the top of Hoodoo, and it was run by a Model T engine. The day lodge was leftover World War II barracks from Camp Adair near Corvallis, Oregon. The menu for lunch was a choice of canned heated chili or hot dogs with mustard and ketchup. There was a fireplace in the building and a warming hut. Let's see here. It's a new computer. On the second floor, the barracks had a wood stove that we called Humphrey. I went with Ed and Ruth Thurston, their children, Craig and Kathy, and Nancy Dodge in their Chevrolet station wagon after school at Eugene High School to spend the weekend as staff at Hoodoo. We drove over the South Santiam Pass as the Clear Lake Cutoff had not yet been built. The dinner menu for the staff was always the same: fried hamburger and Kraft mac and cheese. We slept on army cots and sleeping bags in unheated rooms. When we awoke in the mornings, there were icicles hanging on our washcloths. We loved Hoodoo and the Thurstons. One day a guest came and we all watched in awe as she skied down the head wall. Ed introduced her as his niece, B.Mary, a member of our U.S. ski team. Beverly Jacobs-Zell and I were very interested as we were leaving in a couple of weeks to participate in a ski meet in Sun Valley, Idaho. The next time I met B.Mary was on a PNSA ski trip in Schruns, Austria. It was organized by Meg Bardo, who lived in Seattle. We flew over on a Pan Am 707 from Seattle to Shannon, where we refueled and then went on to Zurich, and then we got on a bus and we were driven to Schruns, which was a cute little village 10 miles off the main rail line. The Seattle people were placed in nice hotels, and the Portland people went onto the edge of the town in a lesser establishment. Schruns had one small Pama lift, so we had to get creative. B.Mary at that point was thinking about what can we do here, you know, we're way out from everything. Well, the Innsbruck Olympics were on, and somehow she got tickets to the opening ceremony. The next day was the downhill, which we couldn't get tickets for, but she said, well, let's go over because I know Martin Stroltz from her days on the U.S. team, and I can order a new pair of his brand new ski boots that he's making. So we went over there and she got fitted for ski boots, and then Martin said, well, come up to my house. There were 4 of us in the party. Come up to my house and watch the downhill, the Innsbruck Olympic downhill with me. So we went up there, and it was the time that Franz Klammer won the downhill for the Austria, and turned into a huge party. So that was really fun. Then she organized a trip where it was 20 miles, and you went from Pama lift to Pama lift. And we went out on this, up a Pama lift, down a hill, up another Pama, down another hill, up and down. And then we went to somebody's house out there where we had, let's see, Heisehuhn and a Blutig Mary. I don't speak any German, but they came with sauerkraut, potatoes, Thurngers. It was just a massive meal. So anyway, we finished with that, and we got through the week, got back to our homes and whatnot, and then B.Mary called me and said she had become a travel agent. and she needed somebody to travel with. My husband and Bud were close friends, but they neither one liked to travel. They liked to fish together, but they did not like to travel. So she invited me to go on a lot of trips with her. We went to Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia. We went to Bali, the Komodo Islands, and to Borneo, into the jungle on a boat like the African Queen to visit the Orangutan Rehabilitation Center. We biked in Austria, France, and the Netherlands. We went on a ski training cruise in the Caribbean. We rode bikes in Cycle, Oregon, thanks to Bonnie and Bill Broad and Norb Wellman. We rode our bikes from Banff to Jasper and returned 3 times. We rode our bikes from Seattle via Bainbridge to BC and back down to the Washington Coast, Oregon. We hiked the trail from Belize to the Oregon coast with a MAC group. And B.Mary and I often reflected on how fortunate we had been to have parents who wanted us to get out and do things. We fished, we hiked, we biked, we traveled. We were just very fortunate in that respect. Both of us, B.Mary and I, had ancestors on the Mayflower, which was the ship that came to Plymouth. Her ancestor, John, Holland. I had first heard of when I was in the 4th grade. They told us about this awful thing that had happened on the Mayflower when a young man fell overboard. Well, he was 18 years old, and they threw a lanyard to him and in the middle of a terrible storm and pulled him in, and he was the longest living male survivor of the Mayflower trip over to Massachusetts. B.Mary told me often of her fond memories of her visits with her grandfather's cabin on the Metolius. When her grandfather passed, her uncle inherited the cabin, and her father got the Studebaker, which were of equal value. I rented a friend's home in Black Butte one summer, and B.Mary came to visit and told me she was looking for a Metolius property. I told her my friend Jay Hagelman's sister, Betty Dyer, was a realtor in Sisters, so we went to see her, and Betty said, "I may have something for you." She and Bud built that property that Betty showed them. I'm clearly grateful for B.Mary and her friendship, and to Bud and all of his family, their family. Their home is the homeliest of homes, and their hospitality always gracious and generous. I talked to B.Mary the day before she left to go to the Metolius. I told her that we were going to have an ice cream and cake party when she returned from her trip, as we were going to miss her birthday. And I told her I was so glad that she was going to the Metolius, and she replied, "I am so glad I can go there to relax." I said, "I will see you when you return, bye-bye." And she replied, "Bye-bye, Shirley." In the words of John Muir, "The mountains are calling, I must go."
Hi, I'm Nancy Johnson. B.Mary was my friend, and I, one of her many, many friends. When we would talk, she would look directly at me and made me feel like I was the most important person in her life. No wonder she had so many, many friends. It seemed like everyone in Lake Oswego knew B.Mary. However, one time I was on a plane sitting next to a man who was from Lake Oswego who did not know B.Mary. The only one I ever met. Her parents and my parents go way back. They had gone to high school together at Lincoln. So our families grew up together. And I must have known B.Mary, it's been over 85 years that I've known B.Mary. So a long time. But when I was growing up, my family lived in Southern California. But every other summer, we would travel north to visit my grandfather, my father's father, who had a home up on Portland Heights, which was south of Burnside. And B.Mary lived over on Northwest Westover. But several times on the way north, we would stop at the Metolius River to visit the Pagets at Camp Sherman. They were staying in the family cabin, which had no electricity. I vividly remember both of our fathers out on the back porch, lighting the kerosene lamps as it became dusk. Mr. Paget was a formidable man, and I was usually terrified of him. He was a big man. We kids would sleep in outdoor tents and take our morning waker-uppers, as we would call them, wading in our tennis shoes across the icy cold Metolius River before breakfast. Many mornings when back in Portland, B.Mary would walk down her hill and I would walk down my hill, and we would meet up for a day of adventures. In those days, the world was a safe place, and our parents apparently never worried much about letting their kids roam freely. Shortly after World War II, my parents moved back to Portland, and I lived with them for 2 years in the late 1950s. B.Mary had been ski racing in Aspen, Colorado, where she had broken something, as I recall. Several months later, when whatever had mended, she and I headed to Mount Hood for a day of warm spring skiing. However, she had forgotten to release the lock on her racing bindings. So when she took a spill in the very soft, wet, mushy snow, she spiraled both bones in her lower leg. In fact, it was so serious they closed the lift because of her screams. It was a serious break. As I remember, it was her 7th broken bone. In any event, back at Timberline Lodge, I called Mr. Paget to tell him what had happened and that we were headed down in the ambulance to Good Sam Hospital. I rode with her down there in the ambulance, and B.Mary had shortly before that met Bud Inkster. So with her father beside her in the hospital room, she turned to me and asked, she said, would I call Bud for her? Well, this big, formidable man, whom I had been terrified of, turned to me and said, don't you dare call Bud. I turned and looked right at him, stood tall, and for the first, and I think only time in my life, defied him as I said, Mr. Paget, if B.Mary wants me to call Bud, I am going to call Bud. And with that, I walked out of the room. Bud came thereafter every day to visit B.Mary in the hospital, and thus began their 60-year-long romance. In the early 1970s, I returned to Portland, but it really wasn't until the Mount Hood chapter of the Over the Hill Gang Ski Club began, about 15 years later, that both B.Mary and I joined and renewed our early childhood friendship. For many years, she had organized and taken ski groups to Europe, and I had done the same, bringing Germans to America. So we both had backgrounds in organizing trips. At B.Mary's instigation, we planned and worked together for 25 years on trips to Sun Valley for the Mount Hood Gang, as we called our groups. More than once, as we toiled over my computer, she would say, Nancy, 2 heads are better than 1. How true, how true. Just a minute. Okay, one year she called me asking if I wanted to hike the Rogue River with her. So off we went on this 5-day Mac adventure. Of course, B and I wanted to stop and smell the flowers along the way. We were in no rush. So on one 15-mile day, we were so slow that they sent a truck out to pick us up for the last mile, as dinner was already being served in the lodge. Another day, walking along a very narrow trail about 400 feet above the river, and I mean narrow. I asked B.Mary what she would do if I were to stumble and fall over the cliff. You know what she said to me? I'd watch you fall. Of course, there was nothing else she could do. B.Mary was great at securing travel agency familiarization trips, FAM trips for short, to various places around the world, with the hope that those agents would send future paying customers. In 2000, when a ski FAM trip to South America came up, she managed to get me included as one of the 10 participants. This FAM trip was to scout out 3 different ski areas. However, arriving in a snowstorm at the famous Portillo ski resort on the border between Chile and Argentina, high in the Andes, we were the last people to arrive before the highway to from